going to be a two-part video talking about the temptation in the wilderness. And people will say real quickly how Matthew 4, well, not really necessarily Matthew 4, but that Matthew is parallelism of Israel and the life of Jesus. I think it should be pretty obvious, although I don't hear many people talk about it, that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days. And we know 40 days is how long they were surveying Canaan, the spies. And we can only imagine what Israel, the rest of them, were doing while the spies, they're probably very fearful. And this has a lot to do with the idea of walking by faith. And it says that the devil says to him in verse 3, "If you are the Son of God, command the stone to become bread." We know David said, a table's prepared for him, his cup overfills. And that's Psalm 23. And David's table is a great place to be at. There was the one son of Jonathan who couldn't walk very well. And you know how in the law one would think that there was some idea that the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned for this man to be born blind. There was this idea that God provides, then somebody who wasn't blessed, that God didn't Barak, that he would succumb to these ailments. And being insular, they developed also the idea that being alive had something to do with cleanliness. That this became especially heightened in the Qumran community. And I don't know if it's actually cleanliness or kind of fascination with it, because there's a limited amount of water. Maybe when you go down to the Dead Sea, they did wash themselves a lot, but also nudity was something of chagrin. And all that being said, I just wanted to talk about what Jesus responded with. It is written, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but of every word of God." So he had told them. So I'm focusing mainly on Deuteronomy, and this is where the Orthodox Study Bible has pointed to being where all these references are from Matthew 4 and Luke 4 is Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy, I feel like nobody understands. Something is missing, and I don't know if it's because of something they did. For instance, in Exodus 17, whether if they're talking about certain events, like the water and Meribah and all this, like these things seem to happen 40 years later, and a lot of people have applied Deuteronomy 5 to talk about this law he did not make with your fathers to mean something other than what it means. A lot have come to think this means the patriarchs, that he did not make it with their fathers. It's pretty clear to see reading Genesis that the patriarchs were in a condition much like David and Solomon, where they were yet saved even though they weren't following the law. Touch not my anointed. And this isn't what it is. I would say what Augustine, I think, said, that there is, they've glossed over in many ways. Numbers and Deuteronomy and Exodus have many overlaps that I can see how one can be confused to think Horeb is actually Sinai. But that's a one heck of a runaround to wind up in the same place as they begun. Not to mention that this whole Exodus in Sinai is coming right up out of the Red Sea, and yes, I do realize that they do point to the fact that Edom did go to the Red Sea, and no, I don't think it's the Gulf of Aqaba, and I'm going to get into a lot about how the water levels have changed and things like that. But one thing that's absolutely missed is the 40 years, the change of the generation. One generation didn't make it. They all went through this top trial and they lost. I mean, look at the fact that there was quails in Exodus. That in the first law they were given bread and quails. In the second law, they weren't allowed to eat the quails. I believe I might be confused about that part. I should have researched that better. But nonetheless, it says here, Moses called unto all Israel, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances which I speak to you in the ears of this day, that you may learn them and observe them. The Lord God made a covenant with us at Horeb. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all us here alive this day." This is after the 40 years, in which everybody died except Joshua and Caleb. And it says, the Lord spoke with you face to face in the mount of the midst of the fire, and Moses stood between them. So this might be where a lot of the confusion comes, because if he's face to face here, that he wasn't truly face to face, because they got up to the mountain, but they couldn't touch the mountain. And maybe on the one side of the mountain, it's the Sinai, the moon, the darkness, and the new day is after the trial. Like Job went through this trial, and after the trial, then they can reach the inheritance. And Moses was the intercessor, but now they're going to become a little nearer, and there's stark differences in Deuteronomy. Even Chabad, if I may, I wouldn't read this article much further, because they do what the Talmud does and a lot of other sources of this kind do, that they simply just say that everything that was written is absolutely true from God, and they just aren't honest brokers about it. They just go, if it means to have to lie, it doesn't matter. Just keep on going with the story, because they have a lot riding on it. And in the same way, Christians don't make good archaeologists. You get these silly ideas like Proto-Sinai and all this in terms of paleography and linguistics, and it's really not that accurate. So we really need honest brokers in uncovering what had happened. And there is a lot of good history. I've shared with you on a number of videos how Abraham may be a reference to the Sumerians in a way, and how Joseph might be representative of the Hyksos in a certain kind of way. And there's a real history there, and Arabic also shares a lot of this history. And the J Haplo group isn't from Muslim conquest. It's because of the same reasons why the Masada and Hyagra and Petra and all these different places with their cisterns and endothermic rivers that don't feed out into the ocean, supplying water for people. That whatever happened many thousands of years ago of people populating these areas, uh, there would be less admixture in the more insular areas, to where they could have their own culture. And I want to get a lot into the Sabbath, but I will have to save till my next video, because I was trying to get into the wilderness in my last video, so I don't want to just uh, skip over that, because it's really, I think, in the unfolding where it really belongs. But I really wanted to talk about how I had talked about Psalm 23 for verse 3, and the devil taking him up to the high mountain. This right here showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And so I don't think this was like really a person. I've seen, I don't know if it was the movie The Greatest Story Ever Told or something, but it's often depicted like a person. I don't know if it was cinematographic limitations, but it might have been a person, but I couldn't understand how they could take him up so high so quick. Um, and all this authority I will give to you, and their glory. So he says. So basically, this has been delivered to me. He says, all this power has been delivered to me, the devil, and I can give it to whomever I wish. So in that way, I don't think it's a man who is this king in the desert, uh, for whatever reason, banished or something. Uh, in Edomia, when the Edomian king is over Judea or something, I don't know how that would really work out. But it says that he can give it to him, but I said in a prior video how much that reminds me of Psalm 2. Why the Gentiles rage is because of a conspiracy from the Sanhedrin. And But God of really being in control, they had to understand this. When Moses destroyed the golden calf, he scattered the gold everywhere, to kind of disavow and disown, to not worry about material gain, that, trust in the Lord and everything. But they see a lot of differences. And some of these rabbis has argued that the first covenant was for all people. And we know that before the law of Moses and all that, there wasn't a law for a special group of people or anything. People, Adam sin reigned for everyone alike, and but there are a few differences. That might point to the documentary hypothesis, but uh, like. What's really interesting is something that's reminiscent of how parts of Zechariah and Nehemiah talked about how there should be no Canaanian or merchant who's not keeping the Sabbath. It's, in Deuteronomy they had even, uh, sorry. No, I really don't know. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Here's one thing they're saying, which I think is really interesting. That I don't know if this revelation came after the gospel, but that it says do not covet, and that's much like Jesus said in Matthew 5. That same kind of lesson, that it's not simply as the Exodus said to remember, which like basically means to keep. But it's more, you shouldn't even think that way, as Jesus would say. And I've been hinting at that in some of my prior videos, how Proverbs and stuff have a deeper look at the law, much deeper look than has taken me to come to this point. I even talk about Luke 16, the shrewd servant, how they didn't give God or the Lord everything that was owed to him, and how Jesus answered the children of the world are much more cunning and crafty. Well, cunning and crafty is what the serpent was, and if you go into Proverbs, there's a certain dispensation to being kind of like that. So it's not necessarily the same. David, we often think about really, not in the way that all the Psalms would have you, or First Kings chapter 1 would have you think, where he's safe and cozy and warmed up, but that like when he was coming up in First Samuel, he was out on the lam. He was living with Philistines and all kinds of people, and that's much how the patriarchs had to live, in fear and everything, and not inside a safe walled-in city or anything, that they should live like strangers and all that. And I want to quickly point out something right here, before y'all get anything twisted. It says here in Deuteronomy 10:22, thy fathers went down into Egypt, 70 of them, and now there are thy God had made them as the stars of heaven for multitude, that same number as the stars of heaven. And you can find that said in First Kings 4 and other places. So it's not some, wait to someday that eventually we can fulfill Genesis 12. It's really something that had hit its fever pitch, in the early days of Kings. But just as David had to go through it, they had to get into it. And I think, even if I may say, the kings too, I think the kings have their own sort of wilderness journey. And that's how come, you have the lack of protection in the hedge coming down, and certain trial for Israel there, and the exile, and a lot of the Psalms pick up from there, the exile. And so, very much reminiscent in that exile is the captivity. I'm getting a little bit mixed up with my terminology. Some call the exile in Babylon, which I would like to just call the exile, and call it the exodus, or the time in Egypt, something different. But nonetheless, like, I'm not even talking about the time in Egypt really, because something people miss, they get so caught up in the 400 years that's including all the time of Abraham's long life and everything. But and how Goshen was actually really nice land, and it might have been kind of peninsular, or between marshlands, and elevated enough that they were able to stay pretty insulated and also safe. But especially the high status Joseph had. But then there was arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and so this is where the slavery begins, and this is around the time Moses was born. So the slavery was really only like 80 years or something, but But the Red Sea was supposed to be some kind of baptism, and Jesus goes from, I think, the baptism to the wilderness, and David, in Psalm 2, he was actually talking about himself, but often a lot of the messianic references are to his son Solomon, and in a way, this wisdom that Solomon had enabled him to, he didn't have the problems David had, such that he was able to have a safe place for God, and such as the temple. The temple was actually a big walled edifice, on the top of the mountain, and that they would protect, with life and limb, and it was surrounded by a city, and on two of the sides, and on one of the sides, there was a good place to dump the trash and what have you, and on the other side was Bethany, and I think that was I've done lots of videos on Bethany, so I'm not going to complicate this one with that. If you want to see, it's the only video I have specifically in Hebrew letters. Har Mashiach or whatever that. But so we have Psalm 2 and verse 6, and Psalm 23 and verse 3, and then it says he was worshiping. He says, "Get behind me," saying, this is something he said to Peter. "Get behind me," saying, and when he said this to Peter, it had direct reference to his death. He was going to die, and Peter said, like, "Let it not be so," and he said, "Get behind me, Satan." So in a way, that has a lot to do with what's the next response, the reverse order in Matthew, but in terms of he being kept by God, that he won't dash his feet. Now it says, it is written, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him you shall serve, him alone only shall you serve." Well, they had learned, it's a right here in, I can't remember where it said, but he had said, he had put them through the trials, he put their fathers through all kinds of trials, and this was in the wilderness, and just as Jesus is here in the wilderness, and it says here in verse 6:16, "Ye shall not try the Lord your God as you tried him in Massah." And Massah is where they were striving and contending with God, and that was how God described it as like a thorn in his side. So just as these people were a thorn in the side to Israel, God's thorn in his side was Israel, his disobedient child, the one that took a stick and put it to his nose. Children will do that kind of stuff. Stick could, get inside your nose or poke you in the eye, or, could really mess you up good. And they don't even check if you're ready, children. They just think that kind of stuff's funny, and that's just what children do. And, it's a taunt. They're trying to taunt you because they know you love them and you're not going to hurt them. So, they just do kind of things like that. And, so that's what Israel did. Here's God's telling him, he showed them already, much like when Jesus came, he showed them, and gave them the choice to believe, and said he's with them. And here they're saying, like, what is it, right in Deuteronomy? Was it 6:13? Deuteronomy 10:20. But wherever it is, it says, "Don't let them say that." That here they were saying I think it was Exodus, that the 17 maybe, that the Lord is not really with us. Don't let them say that the Lord is not really with us, because the Lord is here with us, in us, amongst us, and if that's true that the Lord is amongst you and He's just proven Himself, how powerful He is, why would you think that you're just going to starve, and then it got to the point where all the growing got a little petty, where they talked about the goodness of the fish and the onions and things that they had in Egypt. I really got to do better about writing stuff down, because I had it right there, where he say, like, he fed them with manna. He say, you go to the Lord and possess the land which I swore unto your fathers. So he swore it to them at Sinai. I don't think he's talking about the patriarchs. And they shall remember the way of the Lord thy God, which he led thee 40 years of the wilderness, that they might afflict thee. So just like Job, Jesus here is, hasn't eaten in 40 days. And here they would be afflicted, to prove this is a test. God is testing them, just like He tested Abraham. That God's only son is going to be put on the line. But if you have faith that God's son wouldn't die, he would live, forever, through the generations and everything. That He might afflict thee, whether thou wouldest keep His commandments or no. And He afflicted thee and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna. Here is what I was saying. And fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know. Neither did thy fathers know. So you said that the Sinai covenant is the same as the Horeb covenant. That like they're just two names for the same thing, for no reason whatsoever. Well, I'm here to tell you otherwise. It's the other side. It's by Kadesh Barnea, which is in Moab, past Edom, around Edom way. And Moab is pretty far away from the Red Sea. And 40 years had gone by, and all these tests and all this wandering and trouble. And I think that I think it really needs to be said that you shall not tempt the Lord thy God. That if He's making you go across this journey or whatever, that it's necessary. That let's say the Philistines would hurt them, or the Amalekites or whatever, that it wouldn't work out for them to do it as they wanted to do it, unless God is just like the movie Saw, where He just likes to see people suffer. You would think that there'd be some good reason for all this testing, because God doesn't test, right? God doesn't tempt. But when you read Amos 5, on Amos 5 in my subsidized JPS, see, they can add things like Hosea would be kind of before the Deuteronomy, and it's going to be hard for a lot of it to understand, because the kings are kind of wilderness period and of themselves. That it wasn't until Josiah, past Hezekiah, and also the exile, that you lost the Urim and Thummim, and David, and probably a lot of other things too. But so they can add, things about Jerusalem to an old narrative to give heightened meaning. But I don't know if it's the Christians or others that want to act like Sinai is just Horeb, but they're not, because he said this. He said he gave not the law to their fathers. Well, he said he gave them not manna to eat, but he also gave not their fathers manna to eat. Well, he gave them and their fathers manna to eat, because their fathers are their fathers, the generation before them. And they too were in the wilderness. Not all of them died because the children were not killed, because the children were innocent. And when they talked about numbers, when they're numbering Israel, something they weren't supposed to do, this is the adults. For the Levites, it was those above 30, and for the non-Levites, it was those above 22 or something like that. But whatever it was, or I think it was 22, it was much younger than that. But for whatever reason, there were babies, and these babies weren't circumcised. The circumcised were, the fathers, and the babies did get circumcised when they got into the Holy Land or whatever. But this God that wants them not to sacrifice, to have a contrite heart and everything. And I want to remind and tell anybody who wasn't watching that I was talking a lot about how sacrifice for these insular peoples going way back before Moses, who were in Moab and ruled Egypt and were insulated, and river systems that don't pour out to the ocean and things like that. They can preserve water through cisterns and things like that. These folks, what was I saying? Yeah, they're saying like God was with them through this whole process and in the wilderness, and that God wanted sacrifice, but the sacrifice was going on well before that. Sacrifice was going on through these folks since they invented metal, and this has to do with the time of Adam and Noah and all that, relatively, because this is when they can start cutting animals, when they have developed metal, and or when it became popularized and necessary for every single killing. And whether or not everybody had a knife of their own, they had to take it to the temple so that it could be done proper. And as it was quite graphic. They had all these honorifics for the animal, that uh, that they believed that they were doing it in a more humane way, and that the animal was sustaining them, and from God and everything, and things like that. And now, so there is a lot good to the second law, but I think Christians have a dog in the fight to say there is no second law, because to them there's only the Old Testament simply, and then Jesus is the second law. But I think Paul is able to play on a lot of the Deuteronomy and Samuel and stuff motifs, as they're saying, like in Samuel talks about God was going to do a thing, and he spoke to somebody who wasn't from the priestly line before, and he anointed somebody that wouldn't be expected, and all that. So this is a reference to God doing a thing, and all the they went through it, and nobody could deny it, supposedly. And the New Testament is saying something very much similar. And whether or not these things did see a kind of fulfillment in Daniel and certain kind of fulfillment in other kind of ways, um, in the second temple and stuff like that in its creation. Um, it doesn't minimize that Jesus is the fulfillment of these things. Um, just that it's really the culmination, and it really hits its fever pitch, I believe, which I hope that a lot of others will see when the apostles go through their 40 years of their trial. Like if we go to Hebrews 3, it says here in verse 7, therefore the Holy Spirit says, today you hear this voice, do not harden your hearts of rebellion in this day of trial in the wilderness where your fathers tested me and tried me, and some have worked for 40 years, therefore I was angry with the generation of the 40 years, that they always go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Now, so, Satan is their sworn enemy, right? And he's your open enemy. And this was always clear, but here we have in Amos, it says that virgin Israel is fallen, shall rise no more. And it says here in verse 22, ye, though you offer me burnt offerings and meal offerings, I will accept them not, neither will I regard thy peace offerings or fat beasts. Take thou away from me the noise of thy songs. And it says, did ye bring unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness for 40 years? Well, I don't think they had animals, but yeah, they did have animals. They were given animals by the Egyptians, but I don't understand what happened to the animals. But that being said, so you should take up Succoth, and your Succoth, your king. Remember, their sin in the wilderness. It was saying, is God not with us? Is God not with us? And they weren't supposed to have such doubt, so they're supposed to have the faith, that God has grace on them, and that they aren't going to be called the same thing as their fathers. And these are the images and the star of the God which they made to themselves. They made the star for themselves. Therefore, caused them to go into captivity. And so this tabernacle that before they had got the temple, when they're walking around in this tent, God saying, or supposedly, that this wasn't his tent. This was the tent of Moloch, or rather Chiun, or no, Chiun is Rephaim. Succoth is Succoth means the dwelling. But I've been trying to talk to you about this a lot. How the roots of a lot of the names of gods have special meanings in Hebrew, and like in the Quran, whenever they talk about what Allah does, it always says we. We do this. It's written in that tense, that form. So and God's got all these different names. He's the most righteous, the most merciful, the most great, and all this. And so all these different attributes take on personification in the divine council. The divine council, we have to believe where Satan is doing God's will. It says right here that this has been delivered over to me, and if God's the most powerful, that here in Luke 4, chapter 6, that it's been delivered over to him, that Satan is doing part of God's will. And even though, Peter had said, um, like let it not be so that he would die. We got to understand this is a fundamental part of what Jesus came to do. It wasn't something that just happened. Like it was already written in the stars that this was going to happen. So he chose Judas, who was a devil, and he was the one that put his hand in the same dish that the Christ was putting his hand into. So he wants to consume those same parts to take that same crown, to take that same bread that the Christ was going to use. He wanted to take on for his own self. And the Christian doesn't fail the people that want to be honored by their own flesh and boast in your circumcision and everything. He does, but that's something he takes on for his own self, and that shows how the people that wanted it for their own self don't realize that they give um, David all these privileges to be above the law, to eat the showbread, and they all want to sit at his table, and that he is anointed and begotten of God and everything. But when it comes to Christ, impossible. Charges of blasphemy, capital punishment, and this, that, and the third. And where is he getting this this last test? Again from the Psalms, from Psalm 91. And this has to do with how David wound up after his years kind of exile. And when he, even David was already a nomadic kind of dude to begin with, but he was forced to kind of live like that because of the persecution from Saul. But we know that it was an evil presence of the Lord that made the note that David played on his harp go from, glad tidings, sound of kind of merriment and of whatever. It had turned him sour. It had made him angry, that same note that David had played or poured rather. And this was the key of David. And but this wasn't even Saul who was doing it, much like the Pharaoh. This was the Lord who was, so the Lord is concerned and capable of who the king is and everything. And so he says, Psalm 91, he shall keep his angels keep over you, and your hands they shall bear you, lest you dash your foot against the stone. And this is like the temptation Jesus got on the cross. There was these guys that were telling him, to get himself down from there. And Jesus isn't supposed to let this cup pass before him any more than Israel is, because judgment start with his own house. Even though it's talking about the church or whatever, and what First Peter's 4:17 or whatever that is. That nonetheless it remains true. Just like I was reading from Amos and Joel, they have the same kind of night to day, just like with Sinai to Horeb. That there was going to be a bright future. If there were to be remembrance, and remembrance is kind of like a doing, that if they do this, God would do that. And that's part and parcel, is like the things that show that the outward shows. And Jesus talked about this, that they take the edges, they make the borders of the garments long, because that's but they do this mostly so other people remember who they are. They want the chief seats and everything. And all people want the chief seats. All people want to sit at David's table. That's why it takes some holy meaning to people when they read Samuel, that this, yes, and yes, this is beautiful and everything, that somebody that was thought of as lesser, because of the love that David had for Jonathan, that he would bring him up, and things like that. There's it's beautiful and everything, but um, it's still on the same idea of power. Like David, like he had no right to take someone else's wife, and even Bathsheba. Now her son's dead because of David's sin, and the baby is now dead for no fault of his own. What a all the pain that child went through and everything. It's just really terrible. So we don't want to think of David as being something other than he was. Just a guy that was king and took from somebody else, and but I want to really point out the fact that in John 2, David said that zeal for his father's house consumes him. And consume means eaten up. That you can read into that those very strong, almost literal words, that like just at the Last Supper, he was eaten up. So for the promises, uh, God is giving his firstborn, like very much in tune with the promises and everything, and this place that they're preserved, because this preservation is very important. This is what Psalm 91 is all about. And furthermore, this is a lot to do with what is that Isaiah 37 or whatever, the ones where we talk about Hezekiah and the walls and everything. And and we can get into walls of Ezra 4 and everything, but it wasn't for the zeal of his father's house. Like, you got to understand, uh although Jesus might have had a big following of disciples, he's making war City Hall. You can't battle City Hall. And City Hall would be like the temple and all of the economy that goes on there. A lot of people had a lot riding on that. And for him to be flipping tables and everything, he could wind up and get hurt. So his love for the temple, just like, people could accuse Jesus of being against the temple, or somebody could accuse Paul of being against Jerusalem, but Paul was looking to make a collection for the saints in Jerusalem that hadn't left yet. And Jesus, zeal for his father's house, the temple, has eaten him up. His life is poured out for his own, like that. He's putting himself in grave danger, manifest, and him ultimately giving his life. But that definitely uh, it means eaten down. He was eaten down. He was swallowed. Jesus was swallowed up, consumed by this zeal for his father's house. He was swallowed down, and So when it comes to, it has been said, you shall not tempt the Lord thy your God. This is that they thought that by being preserved, this meant that God was with them. So now God is being tested. Like, oh, God is only with you if you're preserved. Well, the sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous both. There were tares scattered amongst the wheat. There was two thieves crucified next to Jesus, and only one did he say, "You will be with me today in paradise." So not all Israel is Israel. There's mention of a 2/3 in Zechariah, and or 1 out of 12 in John 7. But whatever it is, it is. It has been written for 2,000 years, and I'm trying to give it to you straight. So I'm signing off. Peace.